Kate Malone and Lori Phillips are two ceramic artists that incorporate applique with an organic focus. Where Malone's technique is quite aggressive, Phillips' technique utilizes a much more subtle approach. It's also easy to see how both of these artists are inspired by nature. Let's begin with a look at Malone's work. Kate Malone is a British artist who studied at the Royal College of Art from 1983 to 1986. She was a judge on the BBC's hit show The Great Pottery Throwdown. She is known for her pieces inspired by fruits, nuts, and berries, but also for her pioneering glazing techniques. She has done extensive experimentation in glaze chemistry, as evident with the sphere samples and color boards seen here on the left. Some of her work is rather simple and playful, while other pieces are inspired by highly decorative historical vases. The first piece here is an organic form with leaf and flower applique added in a somewhat random fashion. The second piece is a traditional lidded form with applique added in a controlled geometric pattern. These two pieces incorporate heavy applique. The one on the left is a lidded jar that resembles an artichoke. The one on the right is probably her most famous form, which is that of a pineapple. I assume that these forms are thrown on the wheel, after which clay is added to create the immense texture. However, I know she uses plaster molds rather extensively as well. Here is a pitcher and a vase that are quite delightful. Their gloss surface really helps to bring out the look of a blackberry in the wild. Because of the mass of applique, these pieces are visually quite heavy-looking. Fruits and vegetables are a mainstay of inspiration for Malone. This piece on the left is a relatively realistic-looking head of celery formed into a vase. The piece on the right is much more abstract. It shares similarities in form and movement, but it's less representational and incorporates a controlled weave pattern. It also appears to have opposing spouts. Along with pineapples, the gourd is a common subject for Malone as well. Here are two examples. The one on the left is a tall, slender pitcher with a wide bottom, while the one on the right is more of a short, squatty teapot. They are as individual and unique as the pumpkins and squash you might find at a fall harvest market. Some of her forms make a break from reality. This piece on the left, with what looks like a stem, resembles some kind of otherworldly fruit. I love the apple green color of the upper third of the form and how it's balanced against the heavy texture of the bottom two-thirds. It makes you want to hold the piece in your hands and feel the texture. The piece on the right is an explosion of color. This form is also divided into thirds, with 1/3 being the neck balanced against 2/3 being the body. Here are two more examples that incorporate a burst of color. The glaze in these examples have a crazing effect. It's as if the top color has cracked under the pressure of the expanding knobs. In reality, it's probably more likely that the top color shrunk in the firing process, exposing the base color underneath. Another inspiration of Malone's seems to be crystals or atoms viewed at a molecular level. The inner forms of these vases are not altered by the particles that seem to be attracted to them. However, the glaze physically and visually ties these particles to their forms quite successfully. In these two examples, color is not a dominant element. The lack of color helps to draw our attention to the inner form of the vase and the outer particles that are attracted to them. Because the piece on the left has spheres that are equal in size and fairly evenly spaced, it expresses a strong sense of pattern, which is in stark contrast with the two vases on the right. The particles in this piece on the left are not only attracted to the inner form, but also to each other. This creates the feeling that they're particles floating in space. On the right, we see a pair of lidded canisters comprised of historically traditional forms. This is enhanced by the glaze, which resembles marble or stone. This whimsical set is reminiscent of clowns selling balloons at a circus. The movement that I see in these pieces are of balloons taking off skyward in flight. Looking closely, we see a drip at the base of each balloon. Some drips have fallen to give color to the otherwise colorless inner forms. Malone explores scale by producing work that ranges from very large to quite small. She applies various methods of construction, including wheelwork, sculpture, and the use of plaster molds. We have seen how she appears to stretch the limits of her glaze recipes. The last few examples that I want to share with you are from her woven basket series. These are extremely lifelike, with great attention to detail. Here we see how the natural texture of the weave contrasts with the smooth surface of the glazed pot within. The weave seems to act like a protector, shielding the pot. These last examples appear as if the pieces were actually made from a woven clay. If so, that might be similar to how a ceramic 3D printer would extrude a piece layer by layer. The one on the right incorporates her traditional pitcher form and was made by using different colors of clay. Now let's take a look at Lori Phillips' work. She received her MFA from the University of Dallas in 2014 and later helped to open a community studio called Village Pottery in Phoenix, Arizona. Like Malone, she's also inspired by nature, but in a much more subtle way. The work of both artists can be considered functional, but unlike Malone, Phillips' work is intended to be used. Here are examples of a couple of her bowls. I love the layering effect that she gets by adding a coil around the piece and then blending only the bottom half of the coil into the bowl form. This gives us the illusion of layers. She enhances that separation by applying different textures and colors to each layer. The uneven rim adds to the organic, handmade feel of the work. Notice her signature stamp at the bottom of each bowl. The same technique is used on these two plates. The layers resemble rolling hills or dunes. The bowls are raised up on 3 feet. This adds an element of space under and around the work. The piece on the right shows how a foot is made to appear as if it's pushing through the form of the bowl. We'll see more examples of this later. On these two plates, the landscape becomes more representational. On the right is a detail of the top plate. A river or stream flows along the banks with reed-like leaves added to the top plate and broad bush-like leaves added to the bottom plate. Maintaining the same color scheme, shape, and textures suggests that these two plates are part of a set. Here are examples of a couple of her mugs. You can clearly see the influence of a forest environment with its moss, fungus, wood, and rock. These forms are very organic and loose. The handles blend in nicely with the design of the forms. Raised areas around the foot add movement to the work. These two bulbous forms also incorporate the layering technique. Visually, it draws our eye up and into the opening of each piece. Balance is somewhat precarious. I wonder if the element of space could be enhanced by adding feet to each of these pieces. This would lift them up off the table and provide additional stability. Here are a couple of incense holders that do just that. The top form nests in the body of the piece. It can be lifted off to allow for adding incense. Small holes in the lid create an attractive stream of smoke. I wonder if an air hole at the bottom is required for the incense to burn efficiently. Phillips also makes a lot of jewelry. Here are some examples of her pendants. She does such a nice job of blending elements together in her work. There are so many interesting textures, colors, and shapes in these pieces. The pendant on the right looks as if colored glass was allowed to melt into the center of the piece during the firing process. Here are examples of hanging planters. I love how she comes up with successful form and function for each piece and then reproduces it, altering texture and color. This pinch method of construction with rims that are left uneven adds to the organic feel of her work. Let's look at some cups in greater detail. This piece has a window box that composes a scene. Small bugs are seen exploring in and around that space. In this example, one has escaped. Look closely at the handle. Phillips gives the outside of it a nice rock-like texture while adding a smooth, comfortable glaze to the inside. Here we see the handle growing into the cup in a leaf-inspired design. A small bug explores the rim. And again, the 3 feet appear to be breaking out or growing out of the form of the cup. This is another example of her using the same form and function, but altering both color and texture. We see a lot of contrast in the layers. Around the top is a series of vertical marks in raw clay stained with a cobalt wash. Below that is a smooth glazed surface. Here the glaze is allowed to flow and pool into the rim of the bottom layer. The next 2 examples incorporate pairs of cups with their own nesting environment. The cups hold together very well on their own. However, once the 2 are placed into their respective nesting spots, each pair comes together as a single work of art. With these pieces, Phillips has created a fantasy landscape. These 2 pieces are even more abstract. Because of the pointed bottoms, the glasses must be returned to their nest when not being held. I think these would make a great addition to a toasting ceremony for any occasion, such as a wedding or an anniversary. The last group of Phillips pieces that I want to show you are bottles. The pair on the left are nesting. The one on the right looks a bit like a club. It comes with a cork and a strap, suggesting that it could either be hung on the wall or carried over your shoulder or around your neck. Here are 2 more examples of her Boda-style bottles. The one on the left is lying next to an old broken ruler, indicating that this bottle is about 6 inches tall. Phillips creatively goes beyond the elements of art and principles of design to consider function and purpose as well. She leaves it up to the owner to decide what would be appropriate to carry in these vessels. Kate Malone and Lori Phillips are both wonderful ceramic artists who take the inspiration they get from nature and meld it into unique and expressive work. Although their work is quite different from one another, one thing they have in common is a love for sharing their knowledge with others. There's so much to be learned from these 2 artists. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here today, I encourage you to further explore their work. Thank you for watching.